Chapter 71. Serafina's Entertainment. Serafina Zenith had what most people would call an enviable life. As the princess of the Mount Hua sect, she had luxuries spilling out of every corner of her existence. Fine silks, rare delicacies, and a breathtaking view of the floating gardens were just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. She never lacked for anything, except, perhaps, the thrill of it all. An older adopted brother had taken on the burden of being heir, leaving her free to meander through life like an aimless breeze. People often called this freedom a gift. Serafina thought it felt more like wandering through a museum where all the exhibits were labeled, "Do not touch." It wasn't that she hated her life. There was nothing to hate, really, but that was precisely the problem. Her days were so polished, so meticulously curated, that there wasn't a speck of grit to be found anywhere. The endless ceremonial dinners, the training that everyone assumed she excelled at, because how could a princess not? And the hollow flattery. All of it wrapped her up in a cocoon of monotony. Life was a perfectly balanced equation, and that made it unbearably dull. Class A had, at first, seemed like more of the same. It was the exclusive class for prodigies, filled with individuals whose family trees dripped with power and influence. The chatter in the hallways was all about the future this and the destined that. But as Serafina sat in her usual spot, silently observing the others from behind an aura of detached serenity, she realized something was different here. The people, while equally privileged, weren't boring. No, they were sharp edges and jagged lines that didn't quite fit the mold society had made for them. And Serafina, who prided herself on her indifference to most things, found herself leaning in. Her gaze often drifted to Lucifer windward. The so-called second hero had an air of inevitability about him, as though greatness was his birthright. His verdant eyes and noble demeanor made him look like the protagonist of some grand story, and his drive to grow stronger was palpable. Serafina thought he might finally be the one to break her ennui. She watched him closely, waiting for something extraordinary. But while he was impressive, he was also predictable. Strong, determined, and exactly what you'd expect of someone with his title. And then there was Arthur Nightingale. He wasn't the loudest in the room, nor did he command attention like Lucifer, but there was something about him, something unspoken and unpredictable. He had a way of making the world around him bend just slightly, in ways that didn't quite make sense. It was subtle at first, but Serafina noticed. She always noticed. Things grew more interesting when Rachel Creighton entered the picture. The destined saintess was kind in a way that should have been sickly sweet, but somehow wasn't. Rachel's kindness was genuine, and Serafina found herself oddly fascinated by her. More than that, though, she was drawn to the interactions between Rachel and Arthur. There was a spark there, something unspoken yet undeniable. For the first time in a long while, Serafina's lips curled into a small, amused smile. Then Cecilia Slatemark appeared, and the whole dynamic shifted. Bold, teasing, and unapologetically herself, Cecilia brought an entirely different energy. Watching her clash with Rachel and Arthur felt like witnessing a storm brewing. The chemistry, the tension, the chaos. It was everything Serafina had been waiting for. She leaned back in her seat, watching the three of them as though they were a particularly thrilling drama. The perfect balance of chaos and unpredictability had finally arrived. For once, Serafina wasn't bored. And for her, that was more than enough. Serafina sat quietly at her table, her tea untouched, watching the scene unfold with the kind of detached amusement one might reserve for a mildly entertaining holographic drama. Arthur Nightingale was, once again, the center of attention. Not because he wanted to be, no, Arthur never seemed to seek attention, but because it had an irritating habit of finding him anyway. Today's spectacle featured the two princesses, Rachel and Cecilia, locked in yet another argument. They weren't exactly fighting over Arthur, but they weren't exactly not fighting over him either. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone in the cafe was watching the scene with rapt attention, whispering amongst themselves like extras in a poorly written soap opera. "Man, he's so lucky," someone murmured from the table next to Serafina. She ignored the comment but felt the faint urge to roll her eyes. Lucky? Hardly. If anything, Arthur's situation was less luck and more consequence. People mistook his calm demeanor and clever maneuvers for serendipity, but Serafina knew better. Arthur wasn't just lucky. He was annoyingly competent. A genius, really. Not the kind of genius that memorized ancient spell formulas or achieved perfect combat form, but the sort that seemed to play chess while everyone else was figuring out how to open the box. She sighed softly as the crowd in the cafe began to thin out, the drama losing its audience as students returned to their equally unremarkable lives. Rachel and Cecilia, however, were still bickering with the kind of intensity that suggested neither of them would leave until they'd thoroughly exhausted the subject, or each other. Arthur, with the slyness of someone who had clearly done this before, took the moment to slip away. It wasn't a grand escape, more of a quiet sidestep into freedom. "Hey, Serafina," Arthur said as he approached her table, his smile both casual and slightly self-aware, like someone who knew exactly how absurd his life had become but wasn't about to complain. Serafina blinked, acknowledging him with a small nod. Her sharp gaze flicked over his face for a moment as a thought crossed her mind. "Is he handsome?" she wondered absently. Compared to Lucifer Windward, the golden boy of the academy, probably not. But in the grand scheme of things, definitely top tier. "Are you escaping?" she asked, her tone as direct as ever. Arthur paused, caught off guard by her bluntness, before rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Puppet master," Serafina muttered under her breath as she stood, her words barely audible but carrying just enough weight to reach his ears. "I disagree," Arthur replied, not even bothering to look back as he walked away. Serafina watched him go, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. She wasn't entirely sure if Arthur's life was a comedy, a tragedy, or some chaotic blend of the two. But whatever it was far more interesting than the hollow perfection she was used to. And for now, that was enough to keep her watching. Chapter 72. Prelude to Midterms. The midterms loomed on the horizon like an ominous storm cloud, casting a shadow over every student's nerves. Whispers about the written exams, merciless gauntlets of theory, mana equations, and historical trivia, buzzed through the corridors. But it wasn't the written exams that truly terrified anyone. No, the real nightmare lay in the practical evaluation, a beast of its own making, carrying a staggering 70% of the weight in determining our rank. Nero, ever the master of calm yet somehow soul-crushing announcements, stood before the class with his usual air of effortless authority. "For the midterms," he began, his voice as smooth as polished steel, "we will be conducting a non-elimination battle royale. No beasts this time." The room stiffened. No beasts? That meant one thing. Every threat on the battlefield would have a human face. "Essentially," Nero continued, clasping his hands behind his back, "it's the same as your first practical evaluation, minus the fangs, claws, and snarling wildlife. Points are your currency, as always. But this time, the only way to accumulate them is by hunting other students." Hunting. A charming choice of words. As though this were some light-hearted game of tag and not a calculated free-for-all designed to separate the strong from the faint of heart. Nero smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes and only made you question your life choices. "Not all students are worth the same amount of points," he went on. "The value assigned to each of you has been predetermined by the academy. And pay attention to this, the more students you hunt, the more your point value inflates. Think of it as a bounty system. The higher your score, the more you're worth to everyone else." The implications settled over us like a lead blanket. Hunting wasn't just about gaining points, it was about becoming a target. The better you did, the harder the rest of the trial would become. A perfectly designed, upward spiraling nightmare. "And if you're taken down by another student," Nero added, his voice pleasant in a way that somehow made it worse, "you lose all the points you've accumulated. They'll be transferred to the one who defeated you. You'll revert to your base value." A faint murmur rippled through the room. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't even fear. It was the grim realization that this was going to be as ruthless as it sounded. No beasts. No distractions. Just students pitted against one another, their scores and strategies laid bare for all to exploit. "Questions?" Nero asked, though it was less of an invitation and more of a rhetorical flourish. "Ah, so they're sticking to the script?" I thought, my brain clicking into gear as Nero's explanation sank in. The Academy's motives were as transparent as a pane of glass. In the first practical evaluation, most students had done everything in their power to not fight one another. Instead, they chased after beasts like children hunting holographic Easter eggs, avoiding confrontation like it carried a particularly nasty disease. On the rare occasion two groups crossed paths, it almost always ended in uneasy truces or impromptu team-ups. This time, the Academy clearly wasn't having it. No BS, no distractions, no excuses. Just students versus students. Because, as any fool with half a brain in this world knew, the greatest threat wasn't from slobbering monsters. It was from things that walked, talked, and plotted as well as you did. The other humanoid species. Beasts? Beasts were predictable. Humans and their ilk? Absolutely not. In the novel, Class A had been the prime target during this exact scenario, like a herd of fattened cattle surrounded by hungry wolves. The other classes had ganged up on them with ruthless efficiency, chipping away at their strength until even the so-called elites had fallen. I imagined the same would happen this time. Why wouldn't it? Class A had the biggest bounties and the most egos to bruise. Practically painted a target on your back the moment you stepped into the field. And then there's the ranking. I thought, my mind ticking forward like a finely tuned clock. This was the first evaluation that truly mattered. The previous practicals had been warm-ups, amuse-bouches to whet the Academy's appetite. Sure, my performance in those had temporarily earned me the top spot on the leaderboard, but that was just window dressing. Officially, I was still rank 8. Midterms, however, were the great decider. 70% of the weight in determining rank. In this world, that was the difference between being a hero or a nobody. In the novel, Arthur Nightingale hadn't fared well. He'd been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and ultimately outdone. By the end of the midterms, he'd lost rank 8 and had been unceremoniously kicked out of Class A, replaced by Luke Orden, the current rank 9. Arthur had faded into obscurity after that, his name forgotten in the dust of more dazzling stars. But that wasn't going to happen to me. No thank you. I wasn't the Arthur Nightingale of the novel, stumbling through the chaos like a deer in a plasma storm. I was stronger, sharper, and far more aware of what was coming. The whole fade into obscurity narrative? Not on my watch. Still, strength wasn't the only factor here. My goal wasn't just survival. It was domination. I needed to climb as high as I could, to cement my position at the top. Not just for the rankings but for what they symbolized. In this world, power wasn't just a matter of pride. It was survival currency. So, you just want us to fight each other? Cecilia asked, raising an eyebrow with the kind of skepticism only she could pull off. Lucifer will just take out most of them himself, then. A ripple of unease moved through the room, but Nero seemed completely unbothered, as though the prospect of Lucifer single-handedly dominating a battlefield was a particularly dull footnote in his lecture. That is a possibility, of course, he said, his tone calm and measured. But you're forgetting one key detail, stamina. While the students who are knocked out will recover and be teleported back into play within an hour, even Lucifer will run out of energy eventually. Lucifer, standing near the back with his usual quiet intensity, didn't so much as flinch. He didn't argue either. He simply crossed his arms. A subtle gesture that could have meant anything, but somehow communicated agreement. Nero's words were undeniable. No matter how strong Lucifer was, he wasn't a perpetual motion machine. Nero let the silence hang for a moment before he added, almost as an afterthought, "There's also something extra this time." The room collectively leaned forward, curiosity overtaking caution. "There will be a neutral ground in the center of the island," Nero explained, pacing with deliberate slowness. "A zone you can enter to gain 10,000 points instantly. No strings attached." That, of course, was a lie. There were always strings. Everyone in the room knew it. "You'll be on the island for just 24 hours, Nero continued, ignoring the growing murmurs of speculation. "Plenty of time to test your endurance, strategy, and, of course, your ability to fend off every other lunatic trying to claim that sweet, sweet bounty in the middle." He paused to glance at the clock, his tone shifting to something lighter but no less dangerous. "And before anyone gets too excited about the practical evaluation, let me remind you, this will take place after the written exams. Your grades still matter. Don't think you can scrape by on brute force alone." The reminder was about as welcome as a thunderstorm at a picnic, but Nero delivered it with the kind of finality that made arguing pointless. He stopped pacing and gave the class one last look, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if daring someone to raise a hand and question his judgment. No one did. The stakes were set. The rules were clear, and the promise of chaos hung thick in the air. Chapter 73, Midterms. As promised, Professor Nero began the midterms with the theory exams, that delightful exercise in brain torture disguised as education. The first set of papers was handed out with an almost ceremonial solemnity, and the room quickly descended into a reverent, paper-rustling, pen-scratching silence. The questions were, as expected, pure sadism. Mana theory? Check. Political science? Of course. Beast analysis? Naturally. And not the straightforward list 3 species kind of questions either. No. These were the kind that demanded you understand not just the material but the very depths of the writer's cruel creative soul. They didn't want answers. They wanted revelations. The answer is simple, Luna's voice whispered in my mind, her tone unhelpfully smug. Then tell me, I muttered internally, bracing for some miraculous insight. I can't tell you everything. You won't grow that way, she hummed, managing to sound both teasing and condescending at once. Then why bother saying anything at all? I snapped back mentally, gritting my teeth as I stared at the question that had reduced me to this internal dialogue. Somewhere in the background, someone sighed loudly, their frustration audible in the otherwise silent room. The clock ticked on, dragging us through a marathon of beast behavior, political maneuvers, and mana flow dynamics. I found myself flipping through mental pages of textbooks, cursing every word I'd skimmed instead of read. Still, I pushed forward. Preparation and sheer stubbornness carried me through, one agonizing question at a time. Finally, after what felt like 3 decades and a minor existential crisis, the first set of exams ended. I dropped my pen, leaning back in my chair with a groan that I tried to keep internal but didn't quite succeed. Around me, the classroom was a battlefield of slumped shoulders, pale faces, and the occasional glazed stare of someone contemplating alternative career options. Well done, everyone, Professor Nero said, his voice managing to be both congratulatory and faintly mocking. Take a short break before we move on to the next set. I sank further into my chair, hoping it might swallow me entirely before the second round began. That was so much fun, Rachel chirped from across the room, her bright smile positively glowing with enthusiasm. Normally, that smile would have made my heart skip a beat. Today, it barely registered as my brain struggled to reboot. Fun. Ren turned to her, his purple eyes wide with something between disbelief and betrayal. In what world are those questions fun, woman? His voice rose with every syllable until he was practically shouting. The class collectively winced, some of us more dramatically than others. Even Ren's losing it, I thought, somewhat comforted by the sight of the normally calm martial artist looking like he was one wrong word away from snapping entirely. Don't blame me just because you didn't study? Rachel pouted, folding her arms in mock indignation. This is the level of questions we should have every test. Shut up, Ren yelled, clawing at his hair like he'd just survived a battlefield flashback. It was admittedly a bit much, but I couldn't exactly blame him. This was uncharted academic hell for all of us. It was tough, Cecilia chimed in, her crimson eyes sparkling with a mix of exhaustion and amusement. But fair. Study more next time, Ren. I snorted, catching Ian out of the corner of my eye. He looked like he'd seen the grim specter of death itself, or perhaps just the beast analysis section. Even Serafina, normally stoic and composed, had the faintest crease in her brow, a subtle sign of her frustration. The only people who seemed unbothered were Rachel, Cecilia, and Jean, who looked like they'd strolled through the exam as though it were a scenic park. I think I've aged 10 years, Ian muttered, his face pale and voice shaky. It was brutal, Serafina agreed, her tone calm but lacking its usual impenetrable composure. But it's done. We just need to get through the next set. Lucifer finally spoke, his voice steady but less confident than usual. We can handle it. We've trained for worse. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else, which was mildly terrifying. If Lucifer was rattled, what hope did the rest of us have? It just means my perfect scores will be even more impressive, Rachel muttered, clearly thinking no one would hear. But in a room full of enhanced senses, that sort of comment was practically an announcement.
Rein tuitit.
Ian turned to her with the look of a man on the edge of despair. Rachel's face turned red as she slumped in her chair. Sorry, she mumbled. Our break ended too quickly, and we were thrust into the second round of exams. If the first set had been brutal, the second was positively sadistic. The questions were labyrinthine, designed to strip away every ounce of confidence we had left. By the end, even Rachel's boundless optimism seemed slightly subdued, though I suspected it was more out of pity for the rest of us than any personal struggle. Lucifer rubbed his temples as we gathered in the lounge after the exams, his usual composure frayed at the edges. These theory exams were something else. Brutal, Ren said, slumping into a chair like he'd just run a marathon. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. My brain is still on fire, Ian added, staring blankly at the ceiling. I didn't know it was possible to think that hard. Rachel, ever the optimist, tried to cheer everyone up. At least it's over now. We did our best, and that's what matters. The words were nice, but the lingering despair in the room suggested we were all contemplating the same thing. The practical evaluation might be terrifying, but at least it didn't involve another pen. For now, that was comfort enough. "Hey, Ratch, how well do you think you did?" I asked, pulling her aside from the others, who still looked like survivors of a battlefield, staring into the middle distance as though trying to remember what happiness felt like. Rachel scratched her cheek, the faintest hint of sheepishness creeping into her usual sunny demeanor. "Well, I think I did okay," she said. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "Okay, sure." And the sun was a bit bright. Rachel Creighton was a walking academic nuke, effortlessly dropping perfect scores even at Mythos Academy, the most cutthroat institution in the world. She wasn't just good at exams. She was the reason exams had self-esteem issues. "Well, if you did just okay, I hope you don't lose to me again, Ray Ray," came Cecilia's unmistakable voice, laced with mischief as she joined us out of nowhere. She brushed against my shoulder in that casual, entirely too calculated way she had, and I instinctively stepped back, giving her a wide berth. Cecilia tilted her head, her ruby-red eyes locking onto mine as her finger grazed her bottom lip in a mock-thoughtful gesture. Then came the wink, a small, playful dagger aimed with unerring precision. "She's such a tease," I thought, grimacing as memories of her past antics surfaced uninvited. How does a princess even learn to be this insufferable? Was it a required class? Teasing 101. "I've never lost to you," Rachel said. Her usual brightness dimmed as her eyes narrowed dangerously at Cecilia. Cecilia giggled, the picture of unrepentant amusement. "Hee, sure. But I'm pretty sure that last time we video called, I caught you on your B." "Cecilia!" Rachel's scream could have shattered glass. Her face turned a shade of red that I hadn't thought was biologically possible as she slapped her hands over Cecilia's mouth mid-sentence. Then she turned to me, her blush somehow intensifying. If cheeks could combust, hers were probably nearing ignition. "Is she a tomato?" I thought, trying not to laugh as her trembling betrayed her utter mortification. "Cecilia Slatemark," Rachel growled, her voice low and menacing. "Die! Wait, Saintess! Mercy!" Cecilia managed to get out before Rachel's golden mana flared to life like sunlight condensed into fury. There wasn't even a proper fight. One moment Cecilia was standing there, laughing like she had just pulled off the world's funniest prank, and the next she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. A hush fell over the nearby students as they turned to look at Rachel, who stood as still as a statue, her hands clenched at her sides. She seemed to realize what she'd done only after several long seconds of silence. Slowly, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of embarrassment and the kind of intensity that made my survival instincts kick in. "Arthur," she said, her voice unervingly steady but trembling at the edges. "Wipe this moment from your memory." "Yes," I replied immediately, because what else do you say when faced with an embarrassed saintess who could smite you into oblivion? Without another word, she spun on her heel and bolted, leaving behind a faint golden glow in her wake. The remaining students watched her retreat in stunned silence, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or run for cover. "Pfft," came a small sound from behind me. I turned to see Serafina, sitting calmly at a nearby table, her phone in hand, fingers tapping away. She didn't look up, but her lips were curled into the faintest smirk. Our eyes met. Her smile vanished instantly, her face slipping back into its usual stoic mask as though the giggle had been a figment of my imagination. She returned to typing on her phone with the kind of focus that suggested whatever she was doing was far more important than the chaos around her. I looked back at Cecilia, still unconscious on the floor, and Rachel's rapidly retreating form in the distance. I don't know what's going on in this world anymore, I thought, shaking my head as I walked away. Chapter 74. The midterms began with a drop. Quite literally. One moment, I was standing in the Academy's preparation hall, weapon in hand and the faint buzz of anticipation thick in the air. The next, I was plummeting through the sky, the wind screaming past my ears, and the island below rushing up to meet me like it had a personal vendetta. The Academy didn't bother with subtlety. The drop pods they used weren't much more than reinforced capsules with just enough tech to ensure you didn't pancake into the ground. It was all part of the experience, apparently, getting you in the right mindset. Because nothing says elite training like a near-death experience before the actual trial even starts. I tightened my grip on my sword, the single weapon we were allowed to bring. No armor, no fancy tools. Just the weapon you trusted most and whatever skills you had honed to perfection. Strapped to my belt was the artifact the Academy had provided. A sleek, cylindrical device no bigger than a palm. It hummed faintly with energy, its surface etched with glowing runes. The Academy called it the Evolver. Part life-saving gadget, part grim scorekeeper. Its primary function was simple. If you were eliminated, it would teleport you out of danger, initiate a rapid recovery process, and revive you at a designated neutral zone on the island after an hour. It also tallied your points in real time, broadcasting them to a leaderboard only you could see by pressing its surface. Of course, it had its limits. The Evolver wasn't a free pass to go wild. If you were knocked out, you'd lose all the points you'd accumulated, handing them over to whoever had bested you. The stakes weren't just survival, they were humiliation. One mistake, and you'd spend the rest of the day clawing your way back from zero. The capsule rattled violently as it entered the island's atmosphere, the friction and heat adding another layer of discomfort to my already tense nerves. A voice crackled over the comms embedded in the pod walls. Professor Nero, of course, because who else would have the audacity to sound calm at a time like this? "Welcome to the island," he said, his tone as smooth and casual as if he were announcing the lunch menu. "You have 24 hours to accumulate as many points as possible. Remember, the neutral zone at the center is worth a hefty 10,000 points, but it's also highly contested. Choose your battles wisely, and don't forget, this isn't just about strength. Strategy, endurance, and intelligence will determine the outcome. Good luck. You'll need it." The pod jolted as it released its parachute, slowing my descent just enough to avoid permanent damage. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the island sprawling beneath me. A lush, green expanse of jagged cliffs, dense forests, and open plains, all carefully designed for chaos. In the distance, the neutral zone shimmered faintly, its golden beacon visible even from this height. It was both a promise and a threat. With a hiss, the pod landed, embedding itself slightly into the soft earth. The door shot open, and I stepped out, weapon in hand, the Evolver humming faintly at my side. The air was thick with the scent of greenery and the faint hum of distant wildlife, but I didn't have time to admire the scenery. Somewhere out there, the others had already landed. Some would be hunting, some would be hiding, and some, like Lucifer, would be making their way straight to the center, daring anyone to stop them. The trial had officially begun. Cecilia Slatemark, Cecilia Slatemark. Rachel muttered to herself as she moved, her sapphire eyes scanning the forest ahead like a hawk on the hunt. Her mind was fixed on a single, unshakable goal during the midterms, to hunt down Cecilia Slatemark, that irritating, insufferable princess of the Slatemark Empire. From the very beginning, Rachel hadn't liked Cecilia. They were opposites in almost every way. Where Rachel was kind and composed, Cecilia was teasing and infuriating. But today, it wasn't just a clash of personalities driving her resolve. No, this was personal. Rachel's cheeks flushed as she clenched her fists, the memory of Cecilia's prank, and the fact that she had the audacity to mention it in front of Arthur Nightingale, flooding her mind like an unstoppable tide of mortification. "Cecilia Slatemark," she growled through gritted teeth. The name itself felt like an offense. She stopped for a moment, raising her chin defiantly and balling her fists. "Saintesses can smite evil," she declared aloud, her voice brimming with righteous indignation. "So I'm right." Her expression brightened as if she had just proven a profound universal truth. Yes, this was entirely justified. A moral crusade. Even, then, a presence. Subtle but there. Rachel spun on her heel, her expression instantly composed and polite, though her mana subtly flared beneath the surface. Oh, your Highness Rachel," a voice stammered. A boy emerged from the foliage with his hands raised in surrender. "It is I, Morris von Ponfleck, son of Marquis Ponfleck of the Slatemark Empire." Rachel's sapphire eyes swept over him. Not bad, she thought. Morris von Ponfleck, current rank 12, a light yellow rancor. Decent enough, but ultimately not a threat. The gap between their abilities now was as wide as the Grand Canyon on steroids. To his credit, or perhaps his delusion, Morris didn't seem devastated by the disparity. In fact, he looked delighted, radiant even. Rachel didn't need her gift for reading people to know why. It was written all over his face. He's happy because he knows I'm kind, she thought, her smile unwavering despite the mild exasperation creeping into her mind. Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark were similar in one crucial way. Both were exceptional at reading people. But where Cecilia used that talent to manipulate and tease, Rachel wielded hers for entirely different reasons. She used it to protect herself, to navigate the web of expectations and alliances around her, while treating everyone she met with kindness. "Your Highness, let us team up," Morris said, stepping forward confidently, his grin so wide it bordered on presumptuous. Rachel tilted her head, her polite smile never faltering. She said thoughtfully, remembering the point system Professor Nero had explained. Lucifer started with a base of 10,000 points. She, Cecilia, Arthur, and Run had 1,500 points each as high silver rankers. Serafina, Ian, and Jean sat slightly lower with 1,000 points as mid-silver rankers. And Morris? Morris was worth a modest 150 points. "I might have considered it," Rachel said, her tone light and sweet, as if she were discussing the weather. Morris's grin widened. "But," she continued, her smile sharp as a blade, "you once said something bad about someone I care about." Morris froze. His grin wavered, then collapsed entirely into a look of dawning horror. Before he could stammer out a defense, Rachel raised her finger, pointed it at him like a gun, and mimicked a shot. Bang! Morris screamed, a high-pitched sound that did nothing for his dignity, as the evolver activated, teleporting him away in a flash of light. Rachel watched her evolver tally the points with a faint hum, her expression serene. Then her cheeks flushed as she muttered to herself, fanning her face with her hand. "I called Arthur precious to me," she realized, her voice barely above a whisper. Her face grew hotter, and she shook her head as if to banish the thought. Focus. She needed to focus. Her eyes hardened as she turned her attention back to the hunt. She wasn't done. She wouldn't be done until she'd found Cecilia Slatemark and taken her points, over and over again if necessary. This wasn't just about rankings anymore. This was justice. Divine, Saintess-approved justice. And maybe just a little bit of payback. Chapter 75. This is a bit toxic, no matter how I look at it, I thought, stepping through the forest and dodging yet another low-hanging branch. The midterms were meant to test our skills and adaptability, sure, but the rules leaned suspiciously in favor of certain individuals. Case in point, Lucifer and his ridiculous 10,000 starting points. I understood the logic. Make him a giant glowing target so the rest of us could have a go at him. But it also gave him a head start the size of a small moon. He could lose a dozen fights and still end up leading the scoreboard. Then again, as the sole white ranker among the first years, he was in a league of his own. No amount of petty grumbling could change that. "Luna," I mentally called out, "find me prey." "All right," came her smooth, indifferent reply. Even sealed, her senses as a Chelan far outstripped mine. It was one of her few perks that didn't come with a side of sarcasm. After a moment, she spoke again. "Behind you, some distance away. Two girls clashing. Want to intervene?" I didn't even need to ask who. "Pass," I replied. If Rachel and Cecilia were at it, the last thing I wanted was to get caught in the crossfire of their mutual animosity. Whatever that feud was about, I wasn't interested in finding out. At least not up close. Suddenly, a sharp presence brushed against my senses, and I caught sight of a mana arrow hurtling toward my face. I snatched it out of the air, crushing the glowing projectile in my hand as its residual energy fizzled out. Not bad, I thought, impressed by how well the spell had been cloaked. My senses hadn't picked up on it until the last moment. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked Luna, who, of course, had probably sensed it well before I did. "Didn't feel like it," she replied lazily, as though shrugging in my mind. I sighed. Having a Chelan spirit was meant to be an advantage, not an ongoing test of my patience. "You survived that. Troublesome," came a voice, light and unbothered. My eyes shifted to see a girl lounging atop a blanket spread out beneath a tree, as though this was some kind of picnic and not a battle royale. If Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina were the undisputed heroines of this world, towering figures whose potential practically bent the rules of reality. Then Clara Lopez was something else entirely. A sub-heroine, if you wanted to get technical. Not quite at their level of narrative importance, but close enough to make you tread carefully. Rank 10. The lazy genius. Clara wasn't in Class A. Not because she lacked the skill, but because of special circumstances. Circumstances like the fact that her mother, Radiant ranker Eva Lopez, was also the headmaster of Mythos Academy. And if that wasn't enough, Clara was the prized disciple of Archmage Charlotte Alaric, the most powerful multi-element mind aspect spellcaster in the world, which made me wonder why someone like her had just shot at me. I'm more surprised she bothered attacking, I thought, studying her. She looked as she always did. Relaxed to the point of absurdity, with an air of practiced indifference that said she could win this fight if she cared enough to try. Her mana rank had been the reason she wasn't placed in Class A initially, but she'd fixed that in just 4 months by reaching mid-silver rank from light yellow rank. Typical. Even her lazy approach to cultivation seemed to work better than most people's discipline. Her multi-element casting was impressive, though, and the arrow, despite being a simple 2-circle spell, had been meticulously executed. That, combined with her subtle control of mana, made her far more dangerous than her rank suggested. Didn't expect you to be so jumpy, Clara continued, yawning slightly as she propped herself up on one elbow. Makes me think this might actually be fun. Her tone was casual, almost bored, but her eyes glimmered with a quiet sharpness that said she was calculating something. What that something was, I wasn't entirely sure. But one thing was clear, whatever fight she was looking for, I was probably in it now. She brought a blanket, I thought, dodging another arrow of lightning with a mix of disbelief and mild irritation. How is that not blatant favoritism? Did they give her a picnic basket too? Clara, still lounging like this with some casual weekend outing, flicked her fingers, and a new spell materialized instantly. For circles spun into existence, crackling with energy. Thundershock. The spell roared to life, electricity arcing toward me in a jagged, violent surge. It was efficient, precise, and casually devastating. I felt the hum of its power in my bones. I want to test myself as a spellcaster against her, I thought, the thrill of challenge rising despite myself. With a sharp gesture, fire particles gathered around my hand, the air growing hot and heavy. They swirled and condensed, forming the shape of a spear burning so brightly it left afterimages in its wake.
Flamme lance.
Boom! The two spells collided mid-air, lightning and fire crashing together in a spectacular explosion that rattled the ground beneath us. Smoke and sparks filled the air, and the heat of the clash made the surrounding grass curl and blacken. Not waiting for the dust to settle, I propelled myself upward with a simple 3-circle spell, wind mana surging to my feet and lifting me off the ground. I glided through the air toward Clara, closing the gap between us. "Ho!" Clara said, her voice tinged with genuine interest as she straightened slightly. "You aren't bad." For her, that was probably the equivalent of a standing ovation. As if to underline her approval, a shimmering robe appeared around her, woven from mana and shifting in colors. Yellow, green, red, blue, cyan, and purple. Each hue represented one of her elemental affinities, and they danced across the fabric like living flames. Her elemental versatility wasn't just impressive. It was absurd. She shared the same breadth of affinities as Lucifer, which alone would have made her exceptional. But, of course, Clara wasn't just any spellcaster. She had a gift. Sorcerer's right. Gifts were humanity's trump cards, powers that defied logic and rewrote the rules of magic, physics, and occasionally good manners. Some elements, like light and dark, were naturally opposing forces, and while humans had evolved to wield such contrasts, combining them was another matter entirely. It was like trying to juggle fire and ice without one extinguishing or melting the other. Normally, spellcasters had to navigate a treacherous maze of theory and mana control to balance opposing elements. Clara, however, bypassed all of that with her gift. Sorcerer's Right allowed her to seamlessly blend and wield contrasting elements through her mind aspect, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. It was, in many ways, a counterpart to Lucifer's yin-yang body, which achieved the same effect through the body aspect. Where Lucifer could merge elements like an artist blending paints on a canvas, Clara did it with the precision of a composer conducting a symphony. The battlefield around us reflected her skill. The air buzzed with electricity, swirled with wind, and shimmered with traces of water vapor and flame. It was like standing in the eye of a technicolor storm. Meanwhile, my fire burned fiercely in defiance of her overwhelming elemental mastery. The clash wasn't just about spells anymore. It was about who could impose their will on the battlefield. Clara smiled faintly, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "So, Arthur Nightingale," she said, her voice calm but tinged with the thrill of a predator sensing a worthy opponent. "Let's see how far you can go." Challenge accepted. Chapter 76. Clara's robe of shifting elements flared as she cast another spell, this time weaving fire and water together in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The result was a roaring steam explosion that surged toward me, a boiling mix of scalding vapor and raw force. I countered quickly, summoning a wall of wind with a 3-circle spell to disperse the steam. The barrier held, but barely. The sheer complexity of her attacks was forcing me to think faster and act smarter with each passing moment. "Not bad," Clara said, her tone carrying the same lazy amusement as before, though her movements were anything but sluggish. She flicked her wrist, and 2 new spells formed in tandem. One a spiraling vortex of wind, the other a sharp, crackling spear of lightning. They shot toward me in perfect sync. I cast Flame Lance again, this time aiming it to intercept the lightning spear. The fire and electricity clashed violently, sparks and embers scattering across the battlefield. At the same time, I used a burst of wind to dodge the vortex, landing with a roll just out of its range. Despite the fact that I was high silver rank to her mid-silver rank, her gift more that closed gap. Her spells were calculated and layered, each one forcing me to respond in a way that left me open to the next. I retaliated with a 4-circle fire spell, Inferno Wave, sending a scorching arc of flames surging toward her. She didn't even flinch, raising her hand and conjuring a wall of water that swallowed the flames whole. The steam hissed and evaporated, leaving the battlefield momentarily shrouded in a thick mist. "You're slipping," Clara said, her voice coming from somewhere in the fog. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight, given your rank. Maybe I overestimated you." I gritted my teeth, ignoring the taunt. She wasn't wrong, I was losing ground. Her gift, Sorcerer's Right, was turning this into a battle of creativity and control, not raw power, and in that department she was leagues ahead. But there was one thing she'd underestimated, my ability to think on my feet. "All right, let's change the game," I thought. As Clara's silhouette appeared through the mist, weaving another spell, I activated Lucent Harmony. The air around me shimmered with a faint golden glow as I tapped into the precise, disciplined flow of light mana. She noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she finished casting a 5-circle spell of her own, a crackling web of lightning that spread out across the ground like a trap, forcing me to keep my distance. "You've got something up your sleeve, huh?" she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Something like that," I replied, focusing my mana into a single, concentrated point. Light spells were all about precision, and this one had to count. I poured everything into the casting, forming a 5-circle light spell. Radiant Spear. The glowing spear of pure light took shape above me, radiating heat and power as it hummed with concentrated energy. Clara's expression shifted, the casual amusement giving way to genuine surprise. "Wait," she started, but it was too late. I unleashed the spear, sending it hurtling toward her at blinding speed. Clara's instincts kicked in, and she threw up a shield of combined wind and earth mana, but it wasn't enough. The radiant spear pierced through, shattering the barrier and exploding in a flash of golden light. When the dust settled, Clara was lying flat on her back, her robe of elemental mana flickering faintly as she groaned. Her revolver hummed softly, tallying her points and transferring them to me. "I knew I shouldn't have agreed to this fight," she muttered, shielding her eyes from the sunlight as she sat up. "I swear, every time I try to have fun, it bites me in the ass." I stepped forward, catching my breath, the faint hum of the evolver at my hip reminding me that I'd secured the win. Clara's own evolver activated with a low, mechanical hum as the tally began. A soft light enveloped her, numbers flickering briefly in the air. Plus 1,000 points. The confirmation appeared on my own evolver screen, the points transferring to me seamlessly. I exhaled slowly, my grip on the lingering traces of my light mana finally relaxing. Clara Lopez, mid-silver rank, worth 1,000 points. Not bad at all. And with that, she vanished, her revolver completing the teleport and leaving nothing behind but a faint wisp of mana and the smell of singed grass. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Something about this didn't sit right. Clara wasn't the type to pick random fights, not even during the midterms. Her laid-back nature made her unlikely to seek out challenges unless there was something or someone behind it. Who could have put her up to this? I wondered, the thought nagging at the back of my mind. Clara's comments had been flippant, but there was always an undercurrent of truth buried in her teasing. Maybe she had been testing me for herself, or maybe someone else had nudged her in my direction. Either way, it didn't feel random. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, two blurs of crimson and gold darted through the canopy, clashing with enough force to send shockwaves rippling through the trees. Birds scattered, leaves burned, and the unfortunate squirrels who had made this part of the forest their home probably reconsidered every life choice that had led them there. "Ray Ray, are you that mad at me?" Cecilia called out, her voice laced with mock concern as a shimmering crimson shield sprang into existence in front of her, effortlessly deflecting a barrage of light rays that Rachel hurled her way. "Cecilia Slatemark," Rachel snapped, her voice ringing out like divine judgment. "For daring to say that, I will kill you." "Ah, but what did I even do?" Cecilia replied, her tone infuriatingly sweet as she pressed her palms together. Crimson mana crackled around her fingers before exploding outward, conjuring dozens of spears that hovered ominously in the air. Except, as usual with Cecilia's magic, these weren't just ordinary spears. No, these were chaos-infused monstrosities, their power and speed utterly random, as though even the laws of mana themselves couldn't decide what they were supposed to do. Cecilia smirked as she launched the chaotic barrage. Wait, I know what this is about. It's because Arthur almost found out your embarrassing little secret. Isn't it? Right?" Rachel's face froze into a mask of icy fury, her wings flaring behind her as golden feathers materialized in the air. With a flick of her wrist, the feathers shot forward, precise and glowing, slicing through Cecilia's unpredictable spears like they were papier-mâché. "This is dangerous," Cecilia admitted under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she exhaled onto her palm. Flames blossomed instantly, wrapping around her hand before spreading outward, forming a blazing defense that scorched the incoming feathers to ash. "No secret," Rachel shouted, her voice carrying the weight of righteous indignation. "You pranked me." With a flash of light, she reappeared behind Cecilia, a massive golden hammer now in her hands. It radiated holy mana, glowing with an intensity that could have made lesser mortals rethink their life choices. "Oh, you have to be kidding me," Cecilia screeched, twisting her body just in time to narrowly avoid the hammer's downward swing. The sheer force of it cratered the ground beneath them, sending debris flying. "What kind of saintess smashes people with a goddamn hammer?" "Evil. You're evil," Rachel yelled, her voice high with fury as she swung the hammer again, her wings propelling her forward with terrifying speed. Cecilia grimaced, summoning her crimson mana into her left hand. It crackled and twisted, shaping itself into a wicked-looking pitchfork that glimmered ominously. With a yell of effort, she brought it up just in time to meet Rachel's hammer head-on. Boom! The two weapons collided, releasing a shockwave that rippled through the forest, uprooting shrubs and sending nearby trees swaying precariously. For a moment, neither girl moved, their weapons locked in a tense standoff, sparks of mana flying in every direction. "Thank God you don't know how to swing properly," Cecilia muttered under her breath, her muscles straining as she fought against the overwhelming force of Rachel's hammer. Rachel's eyes glowed with golden light as she pressed forward, the weight of her resolve as heavy as the hammer itself. "You will repent," she yelled, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. Cecilia, despite the dire situation, couldn't help but smirk. Repent? For what? For being right. Rachel's furious growl echoed through the forest as the clash intensified, neither girl willing to give an inch. It wasn't a battle of strategy or cunning. It was pure chaos, and in a way that made it all the more dangerous. Chapter 77. "So, what do you think?" Luna asked, her tone carrying the faint amusement of someone who already knew the answer. "You couldn't pay me enough to step into that," I replied, glancing back at the chaos unfolding in the clearing. Rachel's golden feathers were tearing through Cecilia's chaos spears, and somewhere in the middle of all that light and crimson, Cecilia's scream about hammers and saintesses echoed through the trees. Rachel smiting Cecilia in her self-declared holy crusade? They could have all the fun they wanted without me. I turned and walked away, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever fresh madness they were creating. But, of course, the universe wasn't about to let me off that easily. "You've got to be kidding me?" I muttered as I stopped in my tracks. The air shifted, heavy and oppressive, signaling the presence of someone dangerous. And then I heard the voice. "Arthur Nightingale," it said, calm yet cutting, like a blade drawn across stone. "The commoner who sullied Class A." I turned to face the speaker, and there he was, Ren Kagu. White hair catching the sunlight, his violet eyes glowing faintly. He stood like an artist preparing to critique an unfinished painting. "Ran," I said, gripping my sword instinctively. "Official rank 2. Temporary rank 3. A prodigy whose name carried as much weight as his fists. The direct descendant of Liam Kagu, the first hero, and the inheritor of terrifying talent. This wasn't going to be a spar. This was a trial by fire, and one I couldn't afford to take lightly." Ren tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Well, at least you raised your sword. That's something." And then he moved. The ground cracked beneath him as he launched forward, his fist aiming for my face with the kind of speed that made the air itself recoil. I raised my blade to block, but his violet eyes tracked the movement with terrifying precision. He shifted mid-strike, angling his fist toward my chest instead. I adjusted, pulling my blade back just in time to intercept. The clash sent a shockwave rippling through the trees, and I was forced back a step, my feet digging into the earth to steady myself. "Not bad," Ren said, his voice calm as ever. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling focus. He wasn't just looking at me. He was analyzing everything, my stance, my movements, the flow of my mana. That was the power of his gift, God's eyes. Unlike Lucifer's overwhelming yin-yang body, Ren's gift was surgical, methodical. It saw through everything. "Luna," I thought as I steadied myself, "I'm going to need you." "About time," she replied, her tone as cool as ever. I activated Lucent Harmony. Golden energy pulsed through me, faint but potent, connecting me to the full spectrum of all 11 elements. The air around me shimmered as the technique awakened the potential to draw on elements I otherwise couldn't use. I didn't hesitate. I tapped into wind mana first, reinforcing my agility as I moved to counter Ren's next strike. He noticed immediately, his smirk growing slightly wider. "Interesting. So you do have something worth showing." He shifted again, his stance changing subtly as black energy began to swirl around his fists. The air around him grew heavier, darker, as though space itself was bending to his will. Grade 6 Art Void Fist's first movement. Collapsing step. Ren vanished. One moment he was in front of me, and the next, the space he occupied rippled faintly, distorting like the surface of water. Instinct kicked in as I spun around, wind mana accelerating my movements. He reappeared behind me, his fist aimed directly at my back. I brought my sword up in a sweeping arc, channeling aura through it as I engaged the first steps of my Tempest Dance technique. The strike wasn't just about raw power, it was about building momentum, layering each successive hit to amplify the strength of the next. Sparks flew as my blade met his fist, the clash sending a sharp vibration up my arm. Ren's expression didn't waver. If anything, he looked more amused. "You're building power. Not bad for a grade 5 art. But that won't be enough." He pressed forward, unleashing another strike with collapsing step, forcing me onto the defensive. Each of his attacks felt like a collapsing star, compact and devastating. I countered with quick, precise strikes, layering my Tempest Dance technique as best I could, each swing of my sword growing heavier, faster, more forceful. But it wasn't enough. Ren's grade 6 art outpaced mine at every turn. His attacks were relentless, his movements flawless, and his God's eyes ensured that he was always a step ahead. I could feel the gap between us widening with every exchange. He moved again, this time faster, his aura surging as he transitioned into the second movement of Void Fist. Event Horizon. The air around him warped, compressing into a sphere of crushing pressure. My instincts screamed at me to move, but the pull of the technique was suffocating. I reached for light mana through Lucent Harmony, conjuring a brilliant flare that exploded outward, temporarily disrupting his attack. The light forced Run to pause for half a second, a window so small it barely existed. But it was enough. I channeled the built-up momentum of my Tempest dance technique, my blade surging forward with amplified force. It wasn't enough to overwhelm him, but it disrupted his rhythm, forcing him to retreat slightly. Ren stopped, his breathing steady but his expression sharper now. "Interesting," he said, brushing dust off his sleeve. "You're not bad, Arthur, but you're still out of your depth." I didn't reply, keeping my focus sharp as my mana pulsed faintly around me. This wasn't over. Not yet. Ren stood there, calm and poised, like an artist critiquing his own masterpiece. His violet eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto me, dissecting every movement I made. He wasn't just fighting me, he was breaking me down, piece by piece. Every swing of my sword, every shift in my stance, was met with a counter that felt maddeningly precise. My Tempest dance technique was building momentum, each successive strike layering power into the next, but Ren's grade 6 art, Void Fist, outclassed it. He wasn't just blocking or dodging, he was dismantling my rhythm entirely. He's too fast, I thought, my breath coming in shorter bursts. I had to find a way to disrupt him, to force him into a position where even his god's eyes couldn't save him. "Struggling?" Ren asked, his voice casual, almost bored. His aura flickered around him, faint but suffocating, like the calm before a storm. "Your art is good, but not good enough. You're playing catch-up, Arthur." I ignored the taunt, my mind racing. I needed to break his tempo, but he was already predicting my next move before I even made it. My usual tricks wouldn't work here. "Luna," I called out, my grip tightening on my sword. "Any ideas?" "You're stalling," she replied, her voice sharp. "Use Lucent Harmony. You have access to all 11 elements. Stop fighting him like he's someone you can outpace. Overwhelm him." She was right. I couldn't match him with pure technique. I needed something faster, stronger. A decisive move that even his god's eyes couldn't track in time. As Ren shifted, preparing for another movement of his Void Fist, I felt the opening. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. A slight hesitation in his stance, the faintest delay as he gathered mana for his next strike. Now, I thought. I activated Lucent Harmony, drawing mana from lightning and light simultaneously. My aura flared, golden and crackling with energy, as the spell began to take shape. This wasn't just any spell. It was God Flash, my signature technique, elevated into a 5-circle variant for this battle. The air around me crackled, charged with electricity, as the light mana condensed into a searing, blinding point of pure energy. The spell's brilliance lit up the battlefield, casting sharp shadows through the trees. Ren's eyes narrowed, his god's eyes already reading the movements of the spell. "I see it," he muttered, shifting his stance. But I vanished. The speed of God Flash was unparalleled, a burst of light and lightning mana that propelled me forward faster than the eye could track. Even with his god's eyes, Run couldn't react in time. He moved to intercept, but I was already there, my sword striking true. The collision sent a shockwave rippling outward, the force of the spell breaking through Ren's defenses. His aura faltered, and he stumbled back, his expression tight with frustration. He straightened, breathing hard, his violet eyes meeting mine with a rare mix of respect and irritation. "So that's your play," he said, his tone still calm but edged with defeat. Even with God's eyes, I couldn't follow it fast enough. The evolver at his side hummed softly, tallying the points before activating its teleportation process. A faint glow surrounded him as the device confirmed my gain. Plus 3,000 points. I stood there, catching my breath as the display on my own evolver updated. Run had collected 1,500 points already, bringing my total to 6,000. It was a massive boost, but the fight had taken everything I had to secure it. Before teleporting away, Ren gave me a faint smile, his usual composure returning. "You won this time, Arthur. But next time, I'll see even faster." And then he was gone, the forest falling eerily silent in his absence. I exhaled slowly, the adrenaline fading as I sheathed my sword. The echoes of the battle still lingered, but I couldn't let myself dwell on it. "Good job," Luna said, her tone slightly warmer than usual. "Thanks," I thought, rolling my eyes. But even as I moved to leave the battlefield, my mind was already on the next fight. With every point I gained, I became a bigger target. And if Run was this tough, I couldn't even imagine what was waiting for me next. Chapter 78. I barely had time to catch my breath, my body still buzzing with the aftermath of the fight with Run. My evolver quietly displayed my updated score, the 3,000 points from defeating him feeling heavier than they should. Every point was a double-edged sword, drawing more attention, more predators. And then I heard it, the crunch of leaves, the unmistakable shuffle of multiple feet approaching. I sighed. Of course. It's never quiet for long. Is it? Arthur Nightingale, a voice called out, full of mockery and disdain. Stepping out from the shadows was Morris von Ponfleck, flanked by his group of opportunists. His smug grin was practically dripping with superiority, as if he'd already won. The commoner sullying Class A. What a sad sight. You've got to be kidding me, I thought, gripping my sword tighter. I was tired, my body still aching from the clash with Ren, and now I had to deal with this lot? Morris's gang spread out, surrounding me. There were 4 of them, each grinning like hyenas circling a wounded animal. None of them were particularly strong, but together, and with me this drained, they could pose a real problem. Well, isn't this a scene? Morris continued, his tone dripping with amusement. Arthur Nightingale, the great commoner, looking a little worse for wear. Guess fighting above your station takes a toll. Huh. I didn't reply, my gaze darting between them, looking for openings. Talking wouldn't help here. Morris's sneer widened as he mistook my silence for fear. You know, people like you shouldn't be in Class A, Morris said, stepping closer, his mana flaring faintly. Class A is for nobles, people with lineage, prestige. You're just a fluke. The others laughed, feeding off his arrogance. Yeah, how does it feel to be out of your depth, Nightingale? One of them taunted. You're just a placeholder, another added. Someone else more deserving will take your spot soon enough. My grip tightened on my sword, but my body protested even the idea of another fight. I was running on fumes, and they knew it. My silence only seemed to embolden them further. Well, I suppose this is where your lucky streak ends, Morris said, mana gathering in his hands. I'll make sure to put those points of yours to better use. It's only fair after all. I prepared myself for the worst, digging deep for whatever energy I could muster to fend them off. But before Morris could attack, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. Morris von Ponfleck, Rachel said, her tone dangerously calm. What do you think you're doing? The group froze as Rachel descended from above, golden mana radiating from her wings like a beacon. She landed with the grace of someone who absolutely knew she was in control of the situation. Behind her, crimson mana flickered as Cecilia stepped out of the shadows, her mischievous smile giving way to something far sharper. Well, Cecilia said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Picking on Arthur when he's tired? Morris, that's low even for you. Morris faltered, his mana flickering as the 2 girls advanced. We're just settling a score, he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. He doesn't belong in Class A. Enough, Rachel interrupted, her sapphire eyes narrowing. Arthur belongs where he's earned his place. Unlike you. Morris took a step back, his face turning red as he tried to summon some semblance of dignity. You're defending him? A commoner? You're a Creighton. What would your family? Rachel's golden feathers flared, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her voice was steady, but the edge in it was impossible to miss. Arthur is more worthy of Class A than you will ever be, Morris. Now leave, before I make you. Cecilia stepped forward, crimson mana swirling around her like a storm. You heard her. Run along, Morris. Unless you want to see what happens when a slate mark gets serious. Morris's gang exchanged nervous glances. They weren't stupid. Facing me was one thing, tired, outnumbered. But Rachel and Cecilia? Even they knew better than to take on 2 of the most powerful first-years head-on. This isn't over, Morris muttered, his bravado slipping as he gestured for his lackeys to follow. They disappeared into the trees, their presence fading quickly as they retreated. I exhaled, finally letting my shoulders relax. Rachel turned to me, her expression softening. Arthur, are you okay? Just peachy, I said, my voice dry. Thanks for the save. Cecilia smirked, crossing her arms. Well, aren't you lucky we happen to be nearby? Though I'm starting to think we should charge you for these rescues. Rachel rolled her eyes, ignoring Cecilia's teasing. You should rest, Arthur. You've been fighting too much already. As Morris and his gang turned tail, Their hurried retreat was marked by muttered curses and bruised egos. It was almost satisfying to watch, but apparently Cecilia had other ideas. "Oh no, no, no," Cecilia said, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief as she raised her hand, mana swirling around her fingers. "We don't just let them leave. That's boring." "Cecilia, no," Rachel started, but it was too late. A swarm of chaotic crimson orbs formed around Cecilia, their movements erratic and unpredictable, like fireworks with a grudge. With a flick of her wrist, the orbs shot toward the retreating group. "Chaos bombs," Cecilia called out gleefully, as if announcing the winner of a game show. The orbs exploded around Morris and his gang, bursts of crimson energy lighting up the forest. None of them hit directly. Cecilia was annoyingly good at precision, even with something as chaotic as her magic, but the resulting shockwaves sent the group tumbling over themselves in a comical display of panic. "Run faster!" one of them screamed, tripping over a root and scrambling to his feet. "She's insane," Morris shouted, his face red with both embarrassment and rage as he sprinted away, clutching at his revolver. Cecilia stood there, hands on her hips, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. "Now that is a proper goodbye," she said, turning back to us with a satisfied grin. Rachel sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Did you really have to do that?" "Oh, come on, Ray Ray," Cecilia teased, her tone dripping with mock indignation. "You're too soft. You let them walk away after saying all those awful things about Arthur. Me? I just helped them rethink their life choices. Consider it a public service." Rachel's cheeks flushed slightly as she glanced at me. "They were retreating. It wasn't necessary." "Not necessary?" Cecilia raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. "You're supposed to be a saintess. Aren't you supposed to smite evil or something? You're slipping, Ray Ray." Rachel opened her mouth to retort but closed it again, her cheeks reddening further. "I don't smite people for running away," she muttered. Cecilia smirked, leaning in closer. "Are you sure about that? Because I distinctly remember someone chasing me with a hammer just a little while ago." Rachel's flush deepened, and she waved her hands in a flustered attempt to change the subject. This is different." I couldn't help but let out a chuckle, which earned me a glare from Rachel and a triumphant grin from Cecilia. "You too?" Rachel said, exasperated, but there was no real bite in her tone. "Honestly." "Well," Cecilia said, stretching her arms above her head as if she hadn't just bombed a group of students into retreating. "Now that's sorted, Arthur, you owe me. Big time. Rescues like this don't come cheap." I raised an eyebrow. "What, you want me to pay you in points?" "No, no," she said with a sly smile. "Something much more valuable. Like, maybe you owe me a favor. I'll collect later." Rachel huffed. "Cecilia, leave him alone. He's had enough for today." Cecilia winked at me, her crimson mana flickering faintly around her fingertips. "Fine, fine. For now." I shook my head, a faint smile tugging at my lips despite myself. Exhausted or not, I couldn't deny that having Rachel and Cecilia around had its perks, even if one of them seemed determined to cause chaos at every opportunity. Chapter 79. "Anyway," I said, glancing between them, "did you two decide not to fight, or is this just a temporary ceasefire while you plot each other's doom?" Rachel and Cecilia exchanged looks. It was the kind of silent communication that only came from years of knowing exactly how much you could annoy someone before they actually snapped. Finally, they both nodded. "Yeah, we're equal in strength, so fighting wouldn't benefit either of us," Rachel said primly, though the way her eyes darted toward Cecilia suggested she wasn't entirely done with the idea. "Though I still want to smite her." Cecilia shrugged, a picture of unbothered chaos as she flicked a stray leaf from her sleeve. "Please, Ray Ray, you shouldn't be so mad about what I did. I mean, all I said was, Kaya." "Shut up, Cecilia," Rachel screeched, lunging forward to tackle her. Cecilia, predictably, didn't resist, probably because she found the whole thing far too amusing. Rachel clamped a hand over Cecilia's mouth, her golden mana flickering faintly as if it, too, shared her indignation. Rachel turned her head toward me, cheeks blazing as her sapphire eyes narrowed. It was the kind of look that said, "Don't ask. Just don't." I'm curious, I thought, but also terrified. Whatever Cecilia had done or said was clearly something that lived rent-free in Rachel's nightmares. And based on Rachel's reaction, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Want to team up then?" I asked, deciding that steering the conversation into safer waters was probably the wisest course of action. The two of them stilled, Rachel slowly removing her hand from Cecilia's face, though her glare remained firmly in place. They considered my suggestion for a moment before nodding. "Fine by me," Cecilia said, stretching her arms over her head like this was some casual weekend hike and not a battlefield. "Strength in numbers and all that." "Agreed," Rachel said. Her tone clipped, though she clearly wasn't about to let Cecilia off the hook for whatever crime she had committed. "But only because it's practical." "Okay," Cecilia said with a smirk. "So how many points do you have, Arthur?" 6,000, I replied. Cecilia's eyebrows shot up. "Damn. Well done, Arthur," she said, grinning. "I've only got 1,500 because Ray decided to hunt me down the moment this whole thing started." Rachel, ignoring the nickname entirely, spoke without missing a beat. "I have 1,650. Her tone was calm, but her pointed look at Cecilia carried a very clear message. "I'm better." Cecilia shrugged again, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "What can I say? Chaos loves me." "More like chaos follows you," Rachel muttered, crossing her arms. "Semantics," Cecilia replied breezily. I sighed, glancing between them. Teaming up was starting to feel less like a strategy and more like babysitting two particularly powerful children on the verge of a sugar-induced meltdown. But, well, strength in numbers and all that. Anyway, who did you manage to eliminate? Cecilia asked as the three of us began walking, her tone casual, as though we weren't in the middle of a battlefield masquerading as a test. "Ren and Clara Lopez," I replied. "Oh, you took down Ren?" Rachel said, her voice tinged with surprise. "That's very impressive." It was, but it had also been far too close for comfort. Ren underestimated me, which is why my God Flash worked. His God's eyes hadn't been fully activated, likely because he didn't consider me a real threat. In a proper match, one where he actually tried from the beginning, I'd lose. No doubt about it. I simply didn't have the tools or the power yet to beat someone like Rinkagu. "And Clara Lopez?" Cecilia hummed thoughtfully, her crimson eyes narrowing in that annoyingly knowing way of hers. "She's going to join class next semester. 9th seat." I nodded. It made sense. With her higher mana rank and absurd multi-element casting ability, Clara was easily on par with the rest of Class A. She'd probably belong there even more than I did, though I wasn't about to say that out loud. Rachel frowned slightly, her sapphire eyes flicking to Cecilia. "How do you have so much insider information? I mean, you got the midterms half right since you mixed them up with the first practical evaluation, but still." "Intelligence, darling," Cecilia said, tapping her temple with a theatrical flourish. "And maybe a little bit of charm." She smirked. "Like when I called you." "Oh, shut up," Rachel shrieked, her cheeks turning crimson as she lunged at Cecilia, who dodged gracefully, looking utterly unbothered. Cecilia could tease Rachel about this forever, I thought, watching the scene play out with a mixture of amusement and mild exasperation. "Come on, Ray," Cecilia said, still grinning. "It was cute. You should own it."
No.
Rachel yelled, her voice rising another octave. "Just shut up." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Both of you stop bickering. We need to focus on getting to the neutral zone." Cecilia waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, there's nothing to worry about now, is there? I mean, after all." She stopped mid-sentence. The air around us shifted, sharp and heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Luna's sigils flared to life on my arms, glowing faintly as my silver mana surged. Instinctively, I stepped in front of the girls, raising my arms defensively. A bead of sweat slid down my cheek.
Danger.
"Arthur," Luna's voice whispered in my mind, urgent. "I know," I replied, my senses screaming as the presence grew stronger. And then the voice came, smooth, melodic, and chilling all at once. Well, I didn't expect a mere human to sense me. Impressive. The being stepped out from the shadows, her movements unervingly graceful. My blood ran cold as Rachel audibly gasped, her wings flickering with golden mana. Cecilia, for once, didn't have a single teasing word to say. Her crimson mana flared instinctively, but her expression was one of utter disbelief. "Impossible," Cecilia whispered, her usual confidence reduced to a shaky breath. She wasn't wrong. This shouldn't have been possible. It was inconceivable. And yet, the evidence stood before us, impossible to deny. A demon. Tall, with sleek horns curling elegantly from her head and eyes like pools of molten fire. The creature radiated a presence that felt like oil slicking over my skin. Thick, invasive, wrong. Her dark aura shimmered faintly, as if reality itself struggled to accommodate its existence. Demons hadn't stepped foot on Earth in over 1,000 years. Their presence was forbidden, their kind banished. And yet, here she stood, watching us with a cruel smile that didn't quite reach her burning eyes. "Well," she purred, her voice laced with something dangerously close to amusement. "Isn't this a delightful little group? A saintess, a slate mark, and—" She turned her gaze to me, tilting her head slightly. "You. Curious. Very curious." I clenched my jaw, gripping my sword so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. This wasn't like facing Rin or Clara. This was different. This was overwhelming. The demon's gaze swept over Rachel and Cecilia, lingering just long enough to make my stomach twist. "How fascinating," she murmured, almost to herself. Chapter 80, Deviation. The miasmic species, creatures from other dimensions, were an ever-present threat to Earth. Each continent had its own particular brand of nightmare to deal with. In the north, the shadow seekers roamed, ethereal and relentless. To the west, ogres and orcs waged their brutal campaigns, their sheer physicality a constant challenge. In the south, the dark beasts prowled, their monstrous forms as dangerous as their cunning minds. The east had faced its own scourge in the past. Vampires. Nearly 2 centuries ago, they were driven to the brink of extinction by Liam Kagu, the first hero. His efforts were so thorough that most people believed the vampires were gone entirely. But I knew better. Beneath the surface, in an underground city far from the eyes of the living, the vampires lurked, rebuilding in the shadows. Yet out of all the miasmic species, one stood apart. Not just in strength, but in purpose. They weren't here because of natural migration or desperation. No, their presence on Earth was by design. A calculated, cold invasion. Demons. Where other species clung to survival, demons sought dominion. They didn't come to coexist, didn't even pretend to want peace. They came to conquer. Interplanetary, interdimensional conquerors, with a terrifying knack for dominating every other species they encountered. And they were good at it. The novel I'd read before, while finding myself here, hadn't gone into too much detail about demons. Lucifer, the protagonist, had limited contact with them up to the point I'd read. But I remembered enough. Enough to know this was bad. Very bad. Demons were unique among the miasmic species. At birth, each was assigned to one of the 7 deadly sins. That wasn't just a fancy naming convention, either; it dictated their very being. Each sin came with a corresponding gift, a manifestation of power tied to their nature. The demon in front of us? Lust. A succubus, to be exact. Luna's voice cut through my thoughts, calm and clinical. "A demon baron," she informed me. Her tone made it sound like she was discussing the weather, but my stomach dropped all the same. A demon baron. Equivalent to a white ranker in the human system, which would have been bad enough, but demons didn't play by human rules. Their progression system was different, rooted in miasma rather than mana. But at every stage of their growth, they were inherently superior to humans of the same rank. Just as humans could outmatch beasts of the same mana level through intelligence and technique, demons outclassed humans in almost every meaningful way. This succubus? She could contend with Lucifer himself. She'd lose, eventually; his yin-yang body and sheer power would see to that, but the fact that she could even push him to his limits was a testament to the gulf between demons and humans. And here she was, standing in front of us, her every movement languid and predatory. The air around her shimmered faintly with miasma, thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Her eyes, a shade of violet that seemed to pull you in, fixed on me with an amused glint. She smiled. A slow, deliberate expression that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Well, aren't you 3 interesting?" she purred. Her voice smooth and melodic, each word laced with something that felt dangerous. "Wrong. A saintess, a slate mark, and whatever you are." Her gaze lingered on me, and I gripped my sword tighter, trying to will my legs not to shake. I could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me, as though she was trying to peel back my skin and peer into my soul. This was no ordinary opponent. She wasn't here to play games. She was here because she wanted to be, and that made her all the more terrifying. A slate mark, I thought grimly, the weight of history pressing down on my shoulders. The demons had left Earth long ago, driven back by none other than Julius Slatemark, the man who had forged the Slatemark Empire from blood and defiance. Julius, Luna's first contractor, had met his end at the hands of the demons. At least that's what the records claimed. Whether or not those records told the whole truth didn't matter right now. What did matter was that demons hated the Slatemarks with a vengeance, and the Slatemarks hated them right back. Their mutual animosity ran deep, and if the novel was anything to go by, the first place the demons would attack when they returned would be the Slatemark Empire. "Ratch," I said, my voice low but urgent, as I felt her hand touch my back. A wave of energy coursed through me, Rachel's golden mana infusing my body with renewed strength. My wounds knitted themselves together, the ache in my limbs fading like a bad memory. "Luckily, neither Cecilia nor I pushed ourselves too much," Rachel said, though her breathing was growing heavier with each passing second. Healing wasn't effortless, even for her. "Why the hell is a demon here?" Cecilia hissed. All traces of her usual playful demeanor burned away, replaced by cold, focused anger. Demons, the most reviled enemies of humanity. Hated, feared, and yet forgotten by most thanks to their centuries-long absence. They'd played a significant, albeit indirect, role in the Eastern continent's struggles nearly 200 years ago, a role that Liam Kagu had brought to an abrupt and bloody end. But they were considered relics of the past now, irrelevant to the present day. Until now. "The Academy's not responding," Rachel said, her voice steady but strained. Her wings flickered faintly, a sign of her mana expenditure. I nodded grimly. Demons weren't just stronger, they were smarter too. Blocking our communication was child's play for them, and it was no surprise that the Academy's tech had been rendered useless. "Well, cuties,"